My fiancé was an airline captain. Meticulous, dedicated to his duty. Yet when disaster struck mid-flight and the plane faced imminent doom, he snatched my life jacket to save his first love. Confronted with my accusation afterward, he scowled in irritation. "You're not even dead, so what's the big deal?" As I clutched my chest and collapsed to the ground, he swept his first love into his arms and strode away without a backward glance. He had no idea I suffered from a heart condition, that I couldn't bear the slightest shock. In the end, the plane crashed. I was the only casualty. The passengers' panic was spiraling out of control. As one of the flight attendants on board, I stood unsteadily in the aisle, clinging tightly to the overhead compartment handle, doing my best to calm the crowd. "Please remain calm, everyone. This is just turbulence during flight, there's no need to panic." If I'm being honest, I barely believed my own words. Turbulence was common enough, but nothing like the violent jolts rocking the aircraft today. A terrible thought gnawed at the back of my mind. Sure enough, my reassurances did nothing to soothe the passengers. Instead, their agitation spiked with each bone-rattling lurch of the plane. It was then that Silas Fong stepped forward. I stared at him in shock. "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be in the cockpit flying the plane?" He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, tossing off a dismissive reply. "The first officer's at the controls. I came back to help calm the passengers." I nodded, assuming he'd had no choice but to intervene given how distraught everyone was. A flicker of doubt crossed my mind, but the situation was too urgent to dwell on it. I turned back to soothing the passengers, my voice steady despite my racing heart. That's why I missed the way Silas's eyes darted toward the back of the cabin, toward the woman sitting there, the one who'd been his first love since their teenage years. "Silas. Hurry, put on a life jacket." I'd just grabbed my own life jacket, hadn't even had time to slip it on, when I hastily handed him the last remaining one. The plane was shaking so violently I could barely stand upright. Silas took the life jacket from my hand and slipped it on without a moment's hesitation. I clung tightly to his hand, terror coiling in my chest. Flight attendant training had drilled us on every conceivable emergency scenario, equipped us with protocols for every danger. But when catastrophe loomed overhead and my legs threatened to give out beneath me, all that knowledge, crystal clear in my mind, was drowned out by the primal fear coursing through my veins. In that moment, only one thought kept me grounded. At least the man I loved was by my side. If we were going to die, at least we'd die together. With that thought, I squeezed Silas's hand even harder, as if I could tether us both to safety. What I didn't notice was that my fiancé's eyes were never on me. They were locked on a woman sitting a few rows away. "Watch out." Suddenly, Silas wrenched his hand out of mine and lunged in the opposite direction. A suitcase, torn loose from its overhead bin by the turbulence, crashed down hard on his back. Beneath him, a woman with her face obscured was shielded from the blow. I watched in horror as blood seeped through the fabric of his shirt, a scream catching in my throat. "Silas." But my voice, thick with worry, fell on deaf ears. Silas hauled the woman beneath him to her feet, his tone frantic with concern. "Are you okay? Did you get hurt?" The woman froze for a second, then shook her head gently. "Thank you. I'm fine." Witnessing this, I naively assumed Silas had acted purely out of duty, protecting a passenger from harm. That illusion shattered when my eyes accidentally landed on the passenger manifest lying on a nearby seat. A name both unfamiliar and achingly familiar jumped out at me. Tu Ione Lee, Silas Fong's first love. The girl who'd stood by his side from middle school to college, who'd been the center of his world throughout his adolescence. The girl who'd left him without a backward glance after graduation. In that instant, the face of the woman Silas had just saved overlapped perfectly with the name on the page. This wasn't heroism. It was blind devotion to his first love. I stood rooted to the spot, my throat tightening as I watched him hover over her, his every gesture tender and careful. My eyes stung with unshed tears. The plane lurched again, jolting me out of my heartbreak. There was no time for grief. I herded the passengers into their life jackets, then clasped my hands together and began to pray, my voice a desperate whisper in the chaos. I knew prayers might be useless. But in that moment, prayer was all I had left. The cabin was utter pandemonium. Amidst the screaming and crying, I failed to notice that Ione Lee wasn't wearing a life jacket at all. The two of them huddled together, murmuring too quietly for anyone else to hear. Then Silas walked back over to me, his eyes fixed on mine in a way that made my skin prickle. I frowned, confused. "You're the captain, shouldn't you be in the cockpit? Or calming the passengers? What are you doing standing in front of me like this?" He looked as if he had something difficult to say, his expression conflicted. Finally he spoke, his words hitting me like a slap in the face. "Stella. You haven't put on your life jacket yet. Give it to a passenger." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I leaned in, cupping my ear, until I met his tightly pursed lips and his complicated gaze. Then I knew I hadn't been imagining things. My fingers curled around the life jacket in my hand, knuckles whitening as I turned my head away. "Every passenger already has a life jacket. Why do they need mine?" Silas hesitated, clearly sensing my reluctance. He rushed to explain, his voice strained. "An elderly lady up front couldn't find hers earlier, so she grabbed Ione's. They tussled over it and the jacket got torn. That's why. That's why you want mine." I cut him off, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Silas Fong, do you have any idea how dangerous it is for me to be without a life jacket right now? If you're so worried about her," I added, leveling him with a scathing look, "why don't you give her yours?" Silas's lips twisted into a stiff, humorless smile. He looked almost angry, as if my question had insulted him. "I'm the captain. Something happens to me, this plane is doomed. You're a flight attendant, didn't you pay attention during training? It's your duty to prioritize passengers in an emergency." His voice rose, growing more impassioned with each word, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince me. Before I could respond, he grabbed the life jacket out of my hand in one swift, brutal motion. Then he turned and walked away without a single backward glance. I watched, numb with shock, as he presented the life jacket to Ione Lee like a precious gift. She rewarded him with a soft, grateful smile. I stood frozen in place, my mind blank with disbelief. It wasn't that I was unwilling to give up my life jacket. After all, protecting passengers was my job. And if the worst did happen, a single life jacket might not even make a difference. But I'd never imagined Silas would snatch it from me like that. The only person on the entire plane without a life jacket, I forced myself to swallow my fear and carry out my duties as a flight attendant. Against all odds, the plane eventually stabilized after we passed through the worst of the turbulence. In the end, we landed safely, everyone on board clinging to their sanity by a thread. The moment the plane came to a complete stop, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Once the last passenger had disembarked, the tension that had coiled in my chest for hours finally snapped. It was only then that I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, far faster than it ever should have been. A sinking feeling gripped my chest. I stumbled toward the exit, desperate for fresh air. Just outside the airport, I spotted Silas, his arms slung protectively around Ione's shoulders. The sight of them sent all the pent-up anger from the flight flooding back. Ignoring my racing heart, I marched straight toward them and blocked their path. "What the hell was that, Silas Fong?" He shifted uncomfortably under my glare, brushing me off with a dismissive wave. "I was just looking out for the passengers." "Drop it." His evasive tone only fueled my rage. I grabbed his arm, my gaze locking on Ione behind him as I spat the words out. "Don't think I don't know who she is. And don't you dare forget I'm your fiancé." Ione's eyes widened in surprise. She turned to Silas, feigning innocence. "She's your girlfriend?" I noted how she deliberately downplayed it, girlfriend, not fiancé. Silas wrenched his arm free, his face twisting with impatience. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? You're not even hurt." Whether it was my accusation or having his relationship status exposed in front of his first love, something snapped in him. He looked positively flustered. But his words cut through me like a knife. My already erratic heartbeat skyrocketed, making it impossible to breathe. I clutched my chest, my lips parting to beg for help. Before I could utter a word, Ione crumpled to the ground. "Yone." Silas's panicked shout drowned out my faint plea. His eyes were fixed solely on the woman lying motionless at his feet. But I saw it, the faint flutter of her eyelashes. He was faking it. Silas didn't spare a second glance for the detail. He scooped Ione up in his arms, his face etched with worry as he prepared to rush her away. Summoning every last ounce of strength, I reached out and grabbed the hem of his jacket. Silas. Help me. I can't breathe. He spun around, his voice dripping with irritation, each word lacerating my heart. Will you stop? The second Ione faints, suddenly you're feeling unwell too? Call an ambulance if you're that bad, I'm not a doctor. The air was thick with the taste of suffocation. I couldn't get another word out. My fingers slipped from his jacket as I crumpled to the cold floor. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him carry Ione away without a backward glance. He had no idea I had a heart condition. That this could kill me. Curled up on the freezing tile, I felt my heartbeat slow, then grow weaker and weaker. The chaotic buzz of the crowd faded into a dull hum, then silence. It was as if the world itself was watching me slip away. I forced my heavy eyelids open for one last look at the world. It was just an ordinary day, except that I would never see another one. In my final moments, a young couple passed by, carrying a birthday cake. Cake. What a shame. I'd never get to celebrate my birthday this year. My mind wandered, unbidden, to my birthday last year. Silas had woken me up with a cake and a gift, his eyes soft as he sang me happy birthday. Back then, his gaze had been filled with nothing but me. Lost in the warmth of his ocean-deep eyes, my heart had overflowed with sweet, giddy happiness. Seizing the moment when I was still starry-eyed, Silas had leaned in and made a wish for me before I could stop him. I wish Stelicia will be happy forever, joyful forever. I wish we'll be together forever. 3 forevers. They'd sounded like a promise, proof that at least for that fleeting moment he'd truly loved me. I'd playfully punched his arm, turning my head away with a huff. Hey, it's my birthday. Why are you making wishes for me? Besides, when did I ever agree to be with you forever? Don't get ahead of yourself. Silas had laughed, pressing a kiss to my cheek. Then tell me what you wished for, Monsieur. Let your boyfriend make it come true. I'd lit the candles on the cake, closing my eyes to whisper my heart's desire. I wish Silas Fong and I will be together for a lifetime. Safe and happy always. After blowing out the candles, Silas had leaned in, his voice warm with curiosity. What did you wish for? Tell me. Wishes don't come true if you say them out loud, I teased, shaking my head. Not telling. Then Silas had pulled a small box from behind his back, dropping to one knee as he looked up at me, his eyes brimming with love. I have a wish too, Stella. I wish you'd marry me. Inside the box was the very ring I'd gushed over months ago, pointing at it through a jewelry store window and sighing, "It's so beautiful." Tears had streamed down my face as I threw my arms around him, whispering in his ear, "My wish was that we'd be safe and happy together forever. They say wishes don't come true if you speak them aloud." Now I knew it was true. Not only had we not stayed together forever, but I couldn't even hold on to my own safety and health. With my last shred of strength, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 120. But it was too late. Before the ambulance could arrive, my erratic heartbeat slowed to a crawl. Then stopped altogether. When the plane crash was finally reported, I was listed as the sole casualty. But I wasn't ready to go. I couldn't accept that I'd died so quietly, so senselessly, fading into nothingness like this. My heart condition had never been severe for years, it hadn't flared up once. But today. First the violent turbulence that had racked the plane, then my fiancé snatching my life jacket to save another woman, then his cruel, unfeeling words. They'd all been too much. Maybe it was the depth of my resentment, the weight of my unfinished business, that kept my soul tethered to this world after my death. I didn't dissipate, I lingered, invisible to the living. I watched Silas rush Ione to the hospital, hovering over her bedside as he fussed over her every need. Oh, my dear fiancé. While you were busy fretting over another woman, your own fiancé had breathed her last breath alone on a cold airport floor. I wondered, would he feel even a flicker of guilt when he found out I was dead? It didn't matter. Whether he did or not, I was going to make him pay. I was going to ruin him, reduce him to nothing but rags and regret, before I'd finally rest in peace. I followed them to the hospital, watching as the doctors examined Ione. They ran test after test but could find nothing wrong with her. In the end, they chalked it up to low blood sugar. I let out a bitter, silent laugh. Of course they couldn't find anything, she'd been faking the whole time. Ione lay in the hospital bed, pretending to drift in and out of consciousness until the doctor hooked her up to an IV of glucose. Only then did she wake up, slowly. Silas hadn't left her side for a single second while she'd been unconscious. The moment her eyes fluttered open and landed on him, Ione grabbed his hand, her gaze intense and stubborn, tears pooling in her eyes. "Why did you save me, Silas? You still love me, don't you? I know you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have snatched that life jacket from someone else just because I said I was scared." I laughed again, a hollow, mirthless sound. The scene unfolding before me was straight out of a cheap melodrama, sickeningly cliché. Silas and I had met at work. We were both crew members for the same airline. He was the captain, I was a flight attendant. We'd been assigned to the same team countless times, flying to every corner of the globe together. Slowly but surely our professional relationship had blossomed into something more. We'd dated for 5 years after working together for 8, then gotten engaged naturally as if it were the only possible next step. Ione, on the other hand, was the girl who'd been there for Silas from high school through college, the first love he'd never truly gotten over. When Silas had first pursued me, he told me about her, about the long years they'd spent together. It wasn't until one night when he'd had too much to drink that he'd slurred out the whole story of his broken heart. Yes, Ione had been with him for years. But right after college graduation she'd dumped him out of the blue. The truth was she'd cheated on him, agreeing to date a wealthy heir from their school while they were still together. Then she'd left the country with the rich kid without so much as a goodbye, only sending Silas a text message to inform him that their relationship was over. That's what Silas had told me, his voice thick with bitterness. He'd said he hated his ex-girlfriend with every fiber of his being. I'd believed him. But now I saw the truth. The line between love and hate was thin, so thin that deep down he'd never stopped loving Ione. Where did that leave me? What were our years of love, of shared dreams, of his heartfelt proposal, if they meant nothing compared to his lingering feelings for his first love? I'd thought Silas would take the chance to stay, to rekindle what they once had. Instead he turned his head away, his expression cold and detached. "You've got it wrong," he said flatly. "I only did it because if something happened to you as captain, I'd be held responsible." I watched as Ione's knuckles whitened where she clung to his arm. "And I have a girlfriend," he added, his voice sharp with finality. "We're deeply in love, engaged to be married. Our wedding is just around the corner." With that, Silas gently pried Ione's fingers off his sleeve, turned on his heel, and walked out of the ward without a backward glance. What Ione didn't see, though, was the way he hesitated in the doorway, his eyes filled with a tangled mess of emotions as he glanced back at her. But I saw it all. Even now, consumed by hatred, the sight of that look in his eyes, soft, conflicted, longing, made tears stream down my incorporeal face. "Silas Fong, you love her. That's why you didn't hesitate to abandon me to save her. So where does that leave me? Was I just a replacement, a distraction to help you forget your ex? A toy to amuse you when you were lonely? Or maybe just a suitable marriage partner, nothing more, nothing less? Why didn't you tell me from the start that your heart was still occupied? If I'd known you were still hung up on your first love, I would have never fallen for you. Never would have stayed by your side all these years. I'd spent so long carefully choosing, thinking I'd finally found the perfect man. Turns out my taste was utterly terrible." After leaving the hospital, Silas didn't head home. Instead he went back to the airport. I followed him as he wandered aimlessly through the bustling terminals, his gaze searching every corner as if looking for something or someone. It wasn't until he'd circled the place 3 times that it hit me. He was looking for me. We rarely fought, and when we did I was always the first to cave. This was the first time he'd ever come looking for me after a fight. Too bad. He'd never find me again. His colleagues, finishing their shifts, spotted him loitering around. One of his closest friends clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. "You were a legend today, man. Heard that flight hit some insane turbulence. Only a seasoned vet like you could have gotten that plane out alive." Silas forced an awkward smile but didn't respond. "Hey, where's Stella?" his friend asked, frowning. "She's usually glued to your side like a shadow. Why isn't she with you today?" Everyone at work knew we were engaged, knew how deeply in love we were. Silas opened his mouth to speak, but another colleague cut in. "I saw you two arguing after the flight landed. Did you piss off your girlfriend? That's why she's not here, huh?" Silas let out a scoff. "With her princess temper? I wouldn't dare. It was just a silly quarrel. He probably went home already." The colleague who'd clapped him on the shoulder was a married man with years of experience. He sighed, patting Silas's back again, his tone earnest. Spats between lovers blow over quickly. No big deal. But you've got to talk things out, resolve issues right away before they fester. Seeing Silas still lost in thought, the man sighed again. Otherwise, the rift between you will only grow deeper. Even the strongest love can wear thin if you let resentment build up. Watching my kind colleagues who'd always treated me so well, earnestly trying to talk sense into Silas, tears streamed down my face once more. It won't. Silas replied, his voice firm and confident. Oh, how confident he was. How could he be so sure love wouldn't fade? I laughed until my phantom chest ached, until tears blurred my vision. Love doesn't wear thin? Maybe not. But this wasn't just a silly quarrel anymore. Between us now lay a chasm of death. He owed me a life. Seeing that Silas clearly didn't want to talk about it anymore, his colleague changed the subject, curiosity piqued. By the way, there was this woman passenger today. Seemed like you were paying extra attention to her. Do you know her? Silas's steps faltered. He fell silent for several long seconds before answering, no. You're imagining things. Outside the airport, Silas pulled out his phone almost instinctively. I knew exactly what he was doing. Every day after work we were together. On days we flew different routes, I bombarded him with texts, reminding him to heat up the meals I'd left for him, to take care of himself, all those little messages that only ever seemed to move me. But today, after we'd parted ways, I hadn't sent him a single text. Not a single call. His WeChat screen was eerily empty, save for useless group chat messages. Silas clicked his tongue in annoyance, logged out of WeChat and turned off his phone. But a moment later he pulled it out again, opening our chat history. Page after page of my old messages stared back at him. The fridge has the dinner I made today. I'm on the late-night flight, so heat it up before you eat. You said your watch was broken last time. I took it to get fixed. It's by the door. Don't forget to wear it. I put your clothes in the washing machine before I left. Hang them up when you get home, or they'll get moldy if I'm late back. The last message was from this morning, right before I'd left the house. He stared at the screen as if unable to believe his eyes. He logged out of WeChat, logged back in, refreshed it several times. Still no new messages. Silas frowned, standing rooted to the spot for a long while. Then, as if making up his mind, he dialed my number. To his surprise, it went straight to voicemail. He called again and again, but each time the same recorded voice played. I'm sorry, the number you've dialed is not available at the moment. Anger flared in his eyes. He clenched his phone so tight his knuckles turned white, then stormed home, jaw clenched. Silas pushed open the front door. The house was pitch black, devoid of the usual bustling figure that greeted him. His clothes were still in the washing machine, just like I'd reminded him in my message. He always forgot to hang them up, always waited for me to do it when I got home. But today the clothes remained in the machine, untouched. He opened the fridge. It was empty, no sign of the warm meals I'd always left for him. His phone rang. Silas fished it out of his pocket instantly, his heart skipping a beat. Without a second thought he assumed it was me. But when he saw the caller ID, Ione Lee, a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. It's not Stella. I stared at him, stunned. Did he actually wish it was me? Silas answered the call numbly. Ione's voice came through the line, shaky and unstable, her tone fraught with emotion. Silas Fong, where are you? I need you to come see me. Ione, we broke up a long time ago, Silas said, rubbing his temples, his voice laced with exhaustion. I don't owe you anything. It's late, go to bed. What if I jump off the hospital roof? Ione cut him off sharply. Would you come see me then? Silas's head shot up, his voice suddenly tight with panic. I'll be right there. Don't you dare do anything stupid. My soul followed Silas as he rushed to the hospital without a moment's hesitation, driving like a man possessed. Was she really that important to him? When Silas arrived, Ione was standing on the hospital rooftop, the empty air stretching out around her. No one knew how she'd sneaked up there. She looked at him with tearful, reproachful eyes. How could you leave me all alone in the hospital? Silas dragged her down from the ledge, his face impassive. I have a girlfriend, a fiancée. I was going home to her. Ione's lips trembled at his words. She threw her arms around him and burst into tears. Silas frowned, sniffing the air. Have you been drinking? Ione shook her head dismissively, waving a hand vaguely. Just a little. Only a tiny bit. Silas, I'm back in the country now, she mumbled, clinging to him like a lifeline. Let's start over, please. I've missed you like crazy these past few years. With that, she pressed herself even closer, her arms locked tight around his neck, refusing to let go. Silas froze, caught off guard, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. Don't do this. I'm engaged. But your heart is telling me you still love me. Ione's eyes were hazy with alcohol and longing, a soft, intoxicating gaze that could melt any man's resolve. A flicker of emotion crossed Silas's face, hesitation, maybe even a hint of old affection. Suddenly his phone rang again, shrill and insistent in his pocket. The sound jolted him out of his trance. He pushed Ione away abruptly. I have to go. He turned and walked away without another word. Silas Fong, she called after him. He didn't look back. It wasn't until he'd reached the ground floor that he pulled out his phone. It was my mom calling. She only said one sentence on the other end of the line. Frick. The phone slipped from Silas's hand and shattered on the floor. He ran out of the hospital as if the devil himself were chasing him. His car roared down the street, speeding well over the limit, but he kept slamming his foot on the gas pedal, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rearview mirror reflected his bloodshot eyes. The GPS voice droned steadily, XX City First People's Hospital. He was rushing to the place where my body lay. My soul sat in the back seat watching him silently. The farce was finally coming to an end. Silas Fong was about to find out I was dead. A WeChat message popped up on the cracked phone screen, sent 2 hours earlier. Stella, where are you? I'll come pick you up, okay? Too bad. He'd never pick me up again. But none of that mattered anymore. Inside the hospital's operating room, the air was heavy with grief, broken only by muffled sobs. Silas stood at the door, his world spinning violently. He could barely stand upright, his legs trembling so badly they threatened to give way beneath him. His hand clutched the doorframe, his knuckles bleached white from the force of his grip. When my mom spotted him, she charged forward, screaming and hitting him with her fists, before collapsing to the floor, overcome with sorrow. Give me back my daughter. Give her back to me. Silas paid her no mind. He stared transfixed at the body covered by a white sheet, his hands shaking uncontrollably. This can't be happening. It's impossible. She was fine this afternoon. This can't be Stellacia. It's not possible. He muttered to himself for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly looked up, his face lighting up with a delusional hope. I get it. She's mad at me for today, isn't she? She's playing a trick on me. You're all in on it with the doctors, right? Let me tell you, your acting is terrible, no one would believe this. Tell Stella I'm sorry. It was my fault today. Tell her to come out now. This joke isn't funny at all. He looked around, expecting everyone to burst out laughing and admit the hoax. But the room was deathly silent. Everyone avoided his gaze, their faces grim and solemn. Silas pressed his lips together, his voice hardening. If she comes out now, we can talk this through. I'm not in the mood for this prank. A doctor stepped forward, his expression grave, and held out a death certificate. The hospital doesn't stage pranks, sir, and our diagnosis isn't a joke either. She was already gone before the ambulance even arrived. Sudden cardiac arrest, even the best doctors in the world couldn't have saved her. Silas didn't take the certificate. Instead, he let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, a laugh that quickly spiraled into wild, hysterical cackles, his shoulders shaking violently with each sound. He looked around at the wary faces of the medical staff, his voice rising. That's a lie. I never knew she had a heart condition. It's impossible. That's not Stellacia in there. I'll prove it to you. Before anyone could stop him, he marched over and ripped the white sheet off my head. His words died in his throat. My face was pale, drained of all color, my features frozen in an eternal, peaceful repose. No. This can't be. The doctors, fearing he'd do something drastic in his state of shock, rushed forward and restrained him. I'm sorry for your loss, sir. This isn't real. How could she have a heart condition? How did I never see it? His eyes traced every inch of my face as if searching for a sign, a flicker of life that would prove this was all a terrible dream. Finally, he had no choice but to accept the truth. I was dead. Silas crumpled to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He raised his hand and slapped himself hard across the cheek again and again and again as he chanted, "It's all my fault. It's all my fault." My best friend, who'd rushed to the hospital as soon as she heard the news, stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Her voice cracked with tears as she said, "It's not your fault. Please don't do this to yourself." Stella's condition was never serious. If someone had just helped her when she needed it most, she might still be alive. Her words were like a knife to his heart. He knew exactly who she was talking about. He was the one who'd ignored my pleas for help. He was the one who'd killed me. The realization was too much to bear. Silas collapsed to the floor unconscious. Silas woke up in a hospital bed. The doctor told him he'd fainted from acute emotional distress. His eyes flew open and his first instinct was to look to his side. The bed was empty. He scrambled out of bed, half crawling, half stumbling, not even bothering to put on his shoes. He ran out of the ward in his hospital gown, barefoot on the cold tile. He ran back to our house, but the empty rooms, the silent halls, screamed the truth at him. I was gone. Standing in the quiet, lifeless house, Silas doubled over and retched violently. But he hadn't eaten anything since he'd fainted, so all he brought up was bitter, burning bile. When he'd finished, he went back to the hospital. He snuck into the morgue where the air was cold and still, and there he saw my body once more. All hope left him. He dropped to the floor, his knees hitting the hard concrete, and screamed, his voice raw and broken. Mud and dirt from his bare feet stained the clean white floor. "I deserve to die. I deserve to die." He repeated the words over and over like a broken record. I watched him, my ghostly lips curling into a cold smile. "Yes, you do deserve to die. But first I'm going to take everything away from you." In the days that followed, my soul stayed by his side, watching as he spiraled into ruin. He refused to leave the hospital, insisting on staying by my body day and night. When the hospital staff tried to force him out, he took a knife and slit his wrists over and over, until his arms were covered in blood. The hospital had no choice but to let him stay. His downward spiral was interrupted by a phone call from the airport's management. They'd been calling him nonstop for days, but he'd ignored every single one. On that day they'd had enough. They sent security guards to drag him out of the morgue and back to the airport. The first thing they did when he arrived? They fired him on the spot. Sure enough, this was the only thing that could snap him back to his senses. He grabbed his colleague by the arm, his voice cracking with hysteria as he demanded an explanation. His colleagues were shocked by how haggard he looked, like a completely different man from just a few days ago. They avoided his eyes, refusing to tell him the real reason, only urging him to go see the higher-ups himself. When he finally confronted the airport executives, they asked him just one question. "On the day the plane nearly crashed, why weren't you the one at the controls?" Silas's face drained of all color in an instant. He'd never thought anyone would find out about that. Switching captains mid-flight without authorization was a serious violation of regulations. And on top of that, the plane had almost gone down that day. Firing him was the least they could do. He was the captain assigned to that flight. He was supposed to be the one flying the plane. But before takeoff, he'd seen a familiar name on the passenger manifest, his ex-girlfriend, the one who'd left him and fled overseas. Overwhelmed by a storm of emotions, he'd been too distracted to pilot the aircraft. If the plane hadn't nearly crashed, this little incident would have been swept under the rug, never to be discovered. But now word had gotten to the top brass. Lucky for him, no one had died that day, otherwise even 100 lives wouldn't have been enough to atone for his mistake. Silas clearly understood the gravity of the situation. With nothing left to say, he slunk away in disgrace. In the immediate aftermath of the turbulent scare, everyone had praised Silas for his skill and composure, hailing him as a hero who'd saved the entire plane with his masterful piloting. Now all the blame had been pinned squarely on him. Becoming a qualified pilot had been Silas's lifelong dream. After joining the airline, he'd worked tirelessly, climbing the ranks one step at a time until he'd finally achieved his goal. And now it was all gone, destroyed in the blink of an eye. Watching the light of hope fade completely from his eyes, I couldn't help but laugh. It was me who'd reported his dereliction of duty. In my final moments of consciousness as my life slipped away, I'd sent a text message. I'd told my mom how Silas had ignored my pleas for help, how he'd been the one to kill me. And I'd told her about the captain's switch on that fateful flight. I'd wanted to say so much more, but time had run out. My mom might not have known the ins and outs of airport regulations, but I'd known one thing for certain. Once I was gone, she'd never rest until she'd avenged me. And now she'd stripped him of the career he'd cherished more than anything. There's no grief deeper than a broken heart. Having lost his fiancée and his job, Silas spiraled further into the abyss of despair. He turned to alcohol, drowning his sorrows in bottles every single day until he passed out. Drunk in the empty house we'd once shared. On my birthday, Silas stirred from his drunken stupor, barely coherent. He dragged himself to the store and bought a cake, lighting the candles one by one. Alone in the pitch-black house, he sang happy birthday to an empty room. The flames flickered and died out. Silas suddenly looked up, his eyes fixed on the wisp of smoke curling from the extinguished candles. It was me who'd blown them out. I didn't know how a ghost could do such a thing, but I'd done it. Silas stared in my direction as if he could actually see my incorporeal form in the void. His lips trembled. "Stella. I miss you so much. Take me with you. Let me see you." I whispered my reply, my voice carried on the cold, still air. "Yes." So he lit the candles again. But this time he didn't stop at the candles. As the flames engulfed the room, I watched the fire lick at the hem of his clothes. He stood there, motionless, a faint smile on his lips. My soul suddenly felt light, lighter than a feather, unburdened by all the hatred and resentment that had bound me to this world. My heart was finally at peace. I could leave now without any regrets. He would never see me again. Do you know Silas Fong? A soul with unfulfilled obsessions is doomed to wander this earth forever, trapped in the moment of their death. You wanted to see me so badly, but I never wanted to see you again. I wanted you to lose everything, to follow me into the grave. Now you'll never find me. And with your own obsessions weighing you down, you'll be trapped here forever. I'll condemn you to wander this world as a lonely, restless spirit, for all eternity, forever burning in the flames of your own regret. Silas Fong, my life will begin anew. But you'll be frozen in this moment forever.